I have been a park ranger for 11 years, working in a large park. It's a beautiful place with diverse wildlife and ecosystems, but it has its fair share of problems too. One of the most common issues we face is youths who trespass and drink in the park after hours. We get calls almost every night about it, and as a ranger who works nights, it's been my job to respond to those calls. One spring night in 2008, I got a call from a camper who reported a group of youths making noise and drinking. I headed over to the location, trying to be as stealthy as possible, even though it was a breach of my standard operating procedure. I managed to apprehend a few of them, but the rest ran off into the woods. I called for backup, but the radio connection was bad, and I found myself lost in the middle of nowhere. I knew the area well, but in the dark, it was easy to get disoriented. As I walked through the woods, I suddenly saw a figure walking towards me. I couldn't make out any features, but I could tell it was human. I called out, "Hello?" but there was no response. The figure kept walking toward me, and I began to feel uneasy. When it was only a few meters away, I could see that it was a woman, but she was translucent and I could see through her. She looked at me with a sad expression and then disappeared into thin air. I was stunned, not knowing what to make of what I had just seen. I tried to radio for help, but the connection was still bad. I was alone in the middle of the woods, feeling more vulnerable than I ever had before. The figure stayed with me for days, haunting me with its strange, otherworldly presence. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong in the park, that there was something I wasn't seeing. The next day, I told my friend who had worked in the park for 10 years about my experience. He looked at me with a scared expression and told me that he had heard similar stories from other rangers who had seen the same woman. They believed that she was the ghost of a woman who had died in the park many years ago. I was skeptical at first, but as I talked to more rangers, I realized that there were many unexplained incidents in the park. Strange noises, sightings of ghostly figures, and other unexplainable phenomena were common occurrences. As time passed, I began to notice other strange things. Trees would move when there was no wind, and I would hear footsteps when no one was there. I began to feel like I was being watched, like there was something in the park that was trying to tell me something. I talked to other rangers, and they all had their own stories of strange happenings in the park. Some believed that it was the work of a malevolent spirit, while others thought that it was just the natural order of things, that there was some force in the park that we couldn't understand. One night, while on patrol, I found an old abandoned cabin in the woods. It was dilapidated and covered in vines, but it seemed like it had been there for a long time. As I walked around it, I suddenly felt a cold breeze, even though it was a warm night. I heard the sound of footsteps, but when I turned around, there was no one there. I knew then that the park was haunted, that there was something that had been there for a long time, watching us, waiting for us to discover its secrets. I didn't know what it was, but I knew that I had to find out. Over the years, I tried to investigate the strange happenings in the park, but I never found any concrete evidence of a ghost or malevolent spirit. However, I did discover that the park had a long and often tragic history. There were stories of settlers who had been attacked by Native Americans, of logging accidents that claimed the lives of workers, and of accidents and tragedies that occurred in the park over the years. It seemed that the park was haunted by the ghosts of its past, by the memories of those who had died there over the centuries. Despite the eerie happenings, I continued to work as a ranger in the park for several more years. I never forgot the strange experiences I had there, but I learned to live with them, to accept them as part of the park's unique character. In 2013, I left my job as a park ranger to work for the sheriff's office, but I still think about the park and the strange things I experienced there. I know that there are still rangers who work there, who continue to experience unexplained phenomena, but I also know that they are tough, dedicated professionals who are not afraid to face the unknown. The park will always be a special place to me, a place where I learn to respect nature and appreciate the mysteries of the universe. And while I may never know the truth about the ghostly figure I saw that night in the woods, I will always cherish the memories of my time as a park ranger and the strange and wonderful experiences that came with it. I was on my usual patrol through the remote trails of the national park when I encountered a hiker. He seemed friendly enough, stopping to chat for a few minutes before continuing on his way. I didn't think much of it at the time, as it was a common occurrence in the park. As I continued on my patrol, I noticed something odd. The hiker's footprints had disappeared. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I stopped in my tracks, looking around for any sign of him. But there was nothing, just the sound of the wind blowing through the trees. I decided to follow the trail where the hiker had gone, hoping to find some clue as to where he might have gone. I searched the area extensively, but there was no trace of him. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. I couldn't shake the feeling that something strange had happened. I had been a park ranger for many years and had encountered my fair share of unusual occurrences in the park. But this was different. It was as if the hiker had been a ghost or apparition. I decided to do some research into the history of the park, hoping to find some explanation for what I had experienced. As it turned out, the area where I had encountered the hiker was known for paranormal activity. There had been many reports over the years of hikers disappearing without a trace. I was both intrigued and frightened by what I had learned. I had never been a believer in ghosts or the paranormal, but the evidence was hard to ignore. I decided to conduct my own investigation, determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. Over the next few weeks, I spent my days searching the area for any clues as to what had happened to the hiker. I interviewed other hikers who had been in the area at the time, but no one had seen anything unusual. It was as if the hiker had simply vanished without a trace. One day, as I was walking along the trail where I had last seen the hiker, I noticed something strange. There was a small clearing up ahead that I had never noticed before. It was almost as if it had appeared out of nowhere. I cautiously approached the clearing, my heart pounding in my chest. As I got closer, I realized that there was a small cabin in the center of the clearing. It was old and weathered, with the paint peeling off the walls. It looked as if it had been abandoned for years. Curiosity getting the better of me, I approached the cabin. As I got closer, I could feel a chill in the air. It was as if the temperature had dropped several degrees. I cautiously pushed open the door and stepped inside. The interior of the cabin was dark and musty. There was a single room with a bed, a table, and a few chairs. But what caught my attention was a small diary lying on the table. It looked old and worn, with the pages yellowed with age. I picked up the diary and began to read. As I did, I realized that it belonged to a hiker who had disappeared in the park many years ago. He had been staying in the cabin when he vanished without a trace. As I read through the diary, a sense of dread began to wash over me. The hiker had written about strange occurrences in the cabin, of feeling as if he was being watched, of hearing strange noises in the night. And then, as I reached the final page of the diary, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was a drawing of the hiker standing in the clearing outside the cabin, but behind him there was a figure, a ghostly apparition standing in the shadows. I dropped the diary and stumbled backward, my heart racing in my chest. The hiker had seen a ghost in the very spot where I was standing, and now I could feel a presence in the cabin with me. It was as if the ghostly figure from the diary was standing right beside me, watching my every move. I quickly gathered my things and fled the cabin, not looking back until I was well outside the clearing. As I made my way back to the park headquarters, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just encountered something truly paranormal. Over the years, I've never forgotten that day in the park, and I've never returned to that clearing or the cabin, but I can't help but wonder what happened to the hiker and if his ghost still haunts the park to this day. My name is Michael, and I've been a park ranger for almost a decade now. I've seen some strange things in my time patrolling the woods, but nothing could have prepared me for the crying woman. It was a typical night patrol, and I was out with a group of rangers checking the trails and keeping an eye out for any signs of trouble. We were deep in the woods when we heard the sound of a woman crying in the distance. At first, we thought it might be someone lost or hurt, so we followed the sound. As we got closer, the crying grew louder and more desperate. It was clear that whoever was making the noise was in a great deal of distress. We reached a clearing and saw a woman sitting on the ground, her back to us. She was crying uncontrollably, her sobs echoing through the woods. We approached her slowly, not wanting to startle her or make things worse, but as we got closer, something strange happened. The crying stopped abruptly, and the woman vanished into thin air. We were all stunned, frozen in place as we tried to make sense of what we had just witnessed. None of us could explain it. We searched the clearing and the surrounding area, but there was no sign of the woman or any evidence that she had been there at all. It wasn't until later that we learned the story of the crying woman. Legend had it that a young woman had drowned in a nearby river many years ago. Her body was never found, and her spirit was said to haunt the woods, crying out in despair. Some people claim to have seen her ghostly figure wandering through the trees, always crying and always alone. Others said that she would appear to those who were lost or in need of help, guiding them back to safety before vanishing into thin air. I didn't believe in ghosts or spirits, but the experience had shaken me to the core. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had encountered something otherworldly that night. In the days and weeks that followed, I found myself drawn back to the clearing where we had seen the crying woman. I couldn't explain why, but something about the place called to me. One night, I decided to camp out in the clearing, hoping to catch another glimpse of the ghostly figure. I sat by the fire, watching the stars above and listening to the sounds of the woods. Suddenly, I heard the sound of someone crying in the distance. It was faint at first, but it grew louder and more desperate with each passing moment. I grabbed my flashlight and headed towards the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the clearing, I saw her, the crying woman. She was sitting on the ground, her head in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. I approached her slowly, not wanting to startle her. As I got closer, she looked up at me with tear-filled eyes. For a moment, we just stared at each other, and I could feel the weight of her sadness bearing down on me. And then, just like that, she was gone, vanished into thin air, leaving me alone in the clearing. I never saw the crying woman again, but I'll never forget the experience. It taught me that there are some things in this world that we can't explain, and that sometimes the unknown can be just as real and powerful as anything we can see or touch.